Good job, Brad. Look at the mouth on that.
Welcome to this week's On the Hook video. We are in the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica. National Geographic have named this place the most biodiverse place on the planet. And that massive diversity of life is both on land and in the fantastic waters that surround this peninsula. Those waters start with the fjord where we are at the moment, which is one of the only tropical fjords in the world. Now, when you come to a place like this, you may find with the travel that you end up with very few actual fishing days. You want to maximize that time. So I'll take you through a few things today that are going to make your holiday as successful as it can be. What we're going to talk to you about first is preparation. So preparation is key to any fishing expedition, especially when you're coming halfway around the world. So the preparation starts at home, especially if you're bringing your own rods, your own reels. There's a lot of care and consideration that needs to go into that to make sure that when you actually get out here fishing, they're going to be reliable for you and not lose you any fish. So let's start with rods. A decent bazooka tube or the Plano tubes or any other travel rod tube that's nice and hard is going to give it a lot of protection. Pack it out as much as you can as well to stop the rods rattling around on the inside, because the most common damage is to the guides, and you get to where you want to come fishing and unfortunately you've got cracked inserts, bent guides that are going to damage the line when you hook into that potential fish of a lifetime. So as soon as you get to your destination, before you use those rods, go over every guide on the rod, check that the rod itself hasn't had any impact damage. You don't want to find that out in the middle of a fight of a very special fish. So moving on from rods to the other sort of key component, the reels. It's very important, especially if you've got these sort of travel reels that are only going to come out of the box once, twice, maybe 3 times a year if you're lucky and traveling to these destinations. When you're over here, keep them rinsed off with fresh water as often as possible. Most destinations you go to, the boats that you'll be on, have freshwater tanks and hoses, so you can keep your gear rinsed down and stop that salt ingress. If you can, go for a reel that's got a high IP protection, so that as little of that water is going to ingress as possible anyway. And before you even come over here, think about having your reel checked over and serviced. Make sure that the drag's running right. Make sure that the roller bearings are all working properly, so you're not going to get wind knots and other issues there. In terms of your braid and your line that your reel's loaded with, check that before you're coming out, load fresh. But when you're out, when you're fishing, just make sure after each fish, after each cast, that certainly like your terminal tackle, you haven't got abrasion on the line. Just always keep an eye over your line, and that goes for all your knots and everything else as well. You might even find that your crew on the boat are doing the knots and doing everything for you, but if you lose a fish and you haven't checked your own knot, that's on you, I'm afraid. So just pay attention to detail. Preparation is key in all of these things. So the next thing to talk about is bailups. So unless you're using lures, it's very common, a lot of destinations, this place, Crocodile Bay, Costa Rica included, that you're going to use live baits. Now, when you're hooking a live bait, there's a couple of things to consider. You want it to stay as lively as possible for as long as possible, and you don't want it to come off the hook. So the way you tend to hook them is through the nostrils that you'll see on the nose of a lot of fish, but you need to bear in mind the species of live bait that you're using. So if you've got something like a blue runner, they've got a very bony top to their head, and you can get a hook in under that. It's not going to damage anything, it's not going to bleed the fish out, and it's going to hold in place nice and firmly. So when a fish comes and takes it, it's not going to just easily rip the bait off without taking the hook in. Very important. If you've got something like a sardine, that's a lot softer, so you go up in through the roof of the mouth. Important thing is, once you've got your hook in, take your hook in one hand, take the fish in the other hand, give it a good little tug. If it's coming off, if it's ripping through the fish, start again, grab another fish, start again. So that's really key, because it's very easy to have a bare hook out there where the live bait has just come free within minutes, and you're wasting a lot of fishing time then. you haven't got long on the holiday, you want to maximize every bit of fishing time you've got. So pay good attention to how your live baits are being hooked up. Okay, so we talked about preparing your tackle. There's also an element of preparing yourself. So some of these fish are going to really test you. Okay, fitness levels will come into it, although the majority of it is down to technique. So if you can, even if you don't have the opportunity to practice on these sort of fish that are going to, give you a real workout, look at a few YouTube videos on technique of how you fight these fish, and we're actually going to show you a bit of that and talk a bit about this within this video as well. But take that preparation. When you actually get out here and you're out onto the boats or any other sort of tropical hot destination, the key way to prepare yourself is to keep yourself hydrated. Food's important as well to keep energy up through the day. You don't want to be on a sugar drain when you come to fight that big fish, but the real key thing is hydration. Make sure whatever boat you're on, whatever boat you've hired, it's got a big cooler stocked up with whatever fluids you need to intake to keep yourself properly hydrated, because that's really going to matter when it comes to fighting and playing that big fish. You're going to tank very quickly if you're not properly hydrated, even more so than if you haven't eaten properly. So cannot stress that enough. Even if you're playing a fish for 20-30 minutes as can be possible, have a drink to hand, have somebody passing it to you, take those time to keep the fluids going on board right throughout the day. So we mentioned in preparation there about trying to review a few videos or get as much information as you can on to how to actually play these fish. Now we're going to show you a little clip that talks about high tipping, and it's a mistake that a lot of people that are new to playing big fish on a boat make. Now a lot of other disciplines of fishing, we're very used to keeping a rod tip high, if that's to keep it over the waves, if it's to work fish around the rocks from the shore. It's the last thing you want to be doing with big hard fighting fish on a boat. So when it comes to playing the fish and avoiding high tipping, we'll show you an example of that on a small yellowfin tuna that I was lucky to hook up to earlier today. It's more paramount with bigger fish, but you'll get the gist of it from that clip. Okay, so we're into some sort of tuna, imagine here. We'll soon see when we connect with the weight whether it's a yellowfin or a smaller species like a skipjack. But what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is a few tips for when you're playing fish. And the biggest tip is not to high tip the rod. So you see a lot of people lifting a rod right up in the air, which I'm not going to show you what to do because you shouldn't be doing it. There's a few reasons why you don't do that. First and foremost, not to break the rod. But the other reasons are keep the line further away from the boat by keeping a lower angle. Oh. And you also, if you had a bigger fish, this isn't a very big one at all, but it's spirited. If you had a bigger fish, you actually keep the momentum more on it with short, sharp pumps up and down. If you bring the tip right up, you risk you risk a slack line. You also risk losing momentum and letting the fish recover. So there we go. That's right. As soon as the fish is in, slack line, it's in the leader man's hand. There we go. We have a small yellowfin. So there's a few other things as well regards high tipping in terms of how you fight the fish. Now you need to be aware of your own fitness and own ability to handle these big fish because there's a few devices that you can wear to help and assist you with that. Now if you suffer from back issues in particular, you might like to ask the skipper on the boat if they have a harness that you can wear which will help spread the weight and allow you to use your legs more than your back and so on to play the fish. And there's there's certain techniques there. You very much you squat down into it and that'll work the rod so you can just focus on the reeling. What would be more common, which you'll actually see in the clip where we spoke about high tipping, is just a butt pad, which allows you to place the rod into that, stops it being in any uncomfortable positions, allows you to just get your left arm supporting the rod, holding the rod steady, a little bit of pumping on that, although you can lean into it as well, and then just again focus on the winding. Now, as we showed with the high tipping, very short movements between where you're pumping up to and where you're lowering back to, and that keeps the momentum of the fish moving, as we discussed. So yeah, be honest with your own fitness levels. If you think you're going to tire, if you think you're going to suffer with a bad back, just make sure that the skipper's got the right equipment on board to aid you with that as well. So when you've landed that fish of a lifetime, you're going to want to take a few memories of it. So it's very important that you land the fish in a good way, and that you don't lose a fish at the side of the boat, which can happen incredibly often when the fish is lashing out at the side. We try and leader it up, the line's all too tight, and that's where most incidents happen. So as soon as your leader man, your crew on the boat has got hold of that leader, has got the hold of the fish, slacken that drag off, open the bail arm, depending on what type of reel you're using, give some slack. So if that fish suddenly darts off, decides to go again, it's not going to cause a load of shock on the line, on the rod, and cause any breakages or snappages. It's going to go, you're going to be able to reset and re-engage into the fish again and hopefully land it again. So once you've got your fish safely either aside the boat, so for certain species like billfish, they won't actually bring those aboard, they have to stay in the water in countries like Costa Rica. Or if it's a yellowfin tuna or a grouper or a rooster fish, a jack or so on that they can bring aboard safely, you know, you're going to want to take that photo that's going to give you a memory to last. So have your hose ready to hand, have the camera ready to hand. You're going to want to rinse any blood off of it quickly, and you're going to want to take that photo really quick so you can get that fish back in the water and released, if that's what you intend to do, as quickly as possible. So again, it's back to preparation and knowing where you're going to sit for that photo. Make sure that the sun's not coming from behind you, because it's just going to put you into shadow. So eye up the side of the boat where the sun's going to light you nicely from the side. It's going to get the fish nicely lit up. Try and hold the fish sort of just below head height if you can, dependent on the weight of the fish. You know, you're going to have to make a judgment call on that, and get it all nicely in frame. Try and get the cameraman to have an angle that's looking slightly up at you and the fish, and that's really going to make your fish look as big and majestic as possible within that shot. But there's loads of other sort of specific photography tutorials out there, but yeah, don't forget about that final detail, because that's the memories that you're going to live with. So thanks for watching, and I really hope you have as much success as possible on your next big game adventure.